What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Mets Pod. We are live with our second Winter Meetings special episode. Remember, we'll be back here tomorrow again, Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time to wrap up our Winter Meetings specials on SNY's social platforms, SNY's YouTube as well. And of course, if you do miss the show, you want to listen to the show back again, you can get to the Mets Pod feed and check it out there. So make sure you subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm Connor Rogers, joined by my co-host Joe DeMeo, as always, and welcoming in special guest number 2 to the week, Steve Gelbs, a familiar friend. I spend my Sundays with Gelbs, so it's good to get a little week time action with him as he is on the ground in the winter meetings.
Connor, I was going to say, I don't know what happened, but I thought it was in your contract that you only had to deal with me once a week. So I don't know here, but we'll roll with it, man.
It was a surprise to me as well, Gelbs. And I just have to ask you, because you did the sprint. I'm comfortable at home. You're in San Diego. You were doing Jets on Sunday. You fly out to the West Coast. And the action's been crazy. This Winter Meetings is living up to the hype right now. We did have the false alarm on Aaron Judge. But what is the sprint like being there on the ground right now?
Yeah, this has been the craziest one I can remember. You know, every year it feels like we go into the winter meetings and everybody expects a ton of activity. And generally, honestly, it's kind of a dud. You know, I remember the one year where Machado and Bryce were free agents and everyone's like the buzz in the lobby at all times. Here we go. This is going to be the year. And nothing happened. And you just spend most of your day walking around the hotel and just waiting. And this thing just kicked off right from jump. I mean, I didn't even have a chance to shave when the Verlander news broke. I was just rushing to the set. So it's been good. Honestly, it feels like the industry the last couple of years with COVID, we haven't been able to do this. It just feels like everybody's back together again, and the money's flowing in the industry a little bit more now that we're past the pandemic, and teams are just going for it. So, and certainly it's very exciting covering this Mets team right now, and they're always going to be in the high end of the market, and so there's a lot of buzz at all times. But yeah, I mean, day one was nuts with Verlander and with Trey, and it just out of control.
Obviously, the huge move was Justin Verlander, like you mentioned, and you're around this team as much as anyone. What do you think the fit is with Justin Verlander in this clubhouse? It seems they've turned this clubhouse really into a very competitive and determined group.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's one of the things that probably gets overlooked when talking about the intent of the front office starting last year. It's absolutely about bringing in first and foremost good baseball players, right? They're not going to bring in a guy that they don't think is a fit on the field just because he's a good guy in the clubhouse. But there's so much talk about changing the culture, changing the perception of that room, and bringing in guys that know how to win, have done it before, professionals. And I think they did that across the board. It obviously started with the choice of manager in Buck Showalter, then bringing in Scherzer. Scherzer, I know it didn't end great, and it's a shame that overshadows what he did all season, because he was fantastic on the mound, but he was even more important in that clubhouse with what he's been able to do to help all the pitchers on the staff, to help a lot of the younger players. It was a noticeable change. And, even guys like Escobar and Marte and Cannon, it was just everybody they brought in. Bassett was a real pro. And so you keep that momentum going when you bring in a champion in Justin Verlander. Yes, the compete level is going to be there. He's going to lead by example. I'm sure he'll lead by much more than example if he feels the need to. And so to have those two guys, those grizzled veterans, those champions, Hall of Famers, Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander at the top of the rotation, huge deal. And I love the term of it. I love the fit. We've talked a lot about this too, that Steve Cohen is trying to do essentially what the Dodgers did, right? And that's just wallpaper over the organizational flaws that previously existed by signing high-priced free agents, trying to win now while maintaining a lot of your prospects and building up that system so that eventually it sustains itself.
Gelbs, you've gotten the chance to talk to Billy Epler there. Obviously, Buck is there as well. What is the vibe with those two right now? Obviously, the season ends in disappointment, but as a whole, felt so successful getting over the 100-win hump. But now you want to take it further. Is there any sense of urgency from either of those guys as they head into such a pivotal part of the year?
So there's clearly an urgency. They're never going to let you see it, though, right? Billy Epler is as stoic as it gets, and Buck is an all-time great when how he handles and deflects what he needs to deflect and gets whatever message out he wants to get out. But make no mistake about it. I mean, you look at Buck Showalter; he understands that this is his shot to win a championship. And you look at the moves. You don't need to look at anything other than the moves that have been made. If you are not intending to win a World Series now, you don't sign your closer to that record contract. You don't go out and spend $43.3 million a year on not one, but two pitchers. It doesn't happen. So they don't need to say it. They need to come out and say, we feel an urgency to win. They need to win, and they're planning on winning. And that means, honestly, that there's still a lot more work to do. You know, they've gotten off to a bang with this offseason with Verlander, but if they want to win, especially in this division, which is an arms race right now, they're not even close to where they need to be.
We certainly know that they need to pursue a second starter. They've been open to that. And it actually just dropped from John Heyman that Taijuan Walker signed with the Phillies. So one of their options is not only off the board, but staying in the National League East. But other than that, we know the primary names that are being talked about. It's Kodai Senga, it's Jameson Taillon. And, it's easy to say, which one would you rather have? But from when you think about Max Scherzer, you think about Justin Verlander, these are older guys that you think might miss some time. Do you think the Mets should be prioritizing, maybe a little less ceiling on this pitcher and kind of more of closer to a sure thing for innings? Or should they shoot for the upside of a guy like Senga that could be a number 2 type starter if you're able to figure out all this stuff?
I think you do both. Honestly, I think you do both. The discussion all around is, well, the Mets need 2 starters, one of them being Verlander, the high-end guy, and then that mid-tier starting pitcher. I think this Mets team needs 3, including Verlander. You look at what they already have. You have the 2 guys at the top who, when healthy, when pitching, it's as good as it gets. But we know that it's very difficult to count on Max Scherzer to pitch post to post. And as great as Verlander has been with his ability to pitch every 5th day throughout the course of his career, he's going to be 40 this season. So you have to have you always have to have contingencies no matter what. You always hear you can never have enough starting pitching. 8, 9, 10 guys are going to be needed to go through a season. But after those 2, it's Carrasco, it's McGill, and it's Peterson. And beyond that, you don't have a whole heck of a lot. And so if I'm the Mets, I'm going after Senga, and I'm going after one of those mid-tier guys that you're talking about. I think they need 3. Again, including Verlander, I think they need 3. I don't think there's too many pitchers that you can go out and get.
We're now on offseason number 3 under Steve Cohen's ownership of the Mets. And each one, even though he came in kind of late the year they got Lindor, each one has had a high-profile, high-stakes move. They've been very active. He has lived up to the billing of trying to get the Mets in a contending window ASAP while rebuilding the farm system for sustainability long-term. But Gelbs, being around this franchise so often, what has impressed you the most with the Cohen ownership when it's time to retool the team in the winter?
I just think it's the willingness to close. You know what I mean? Like you'll see across the league teams that are interested and they'll kind of let things linger a little bit and kind of get up to that point and then not go that extra mile, not make that extra push to close it in the moment. And I think the one thing that you've seen when it comes to Steve Cohen is that if he targets somebody that he wants, somebody that him and the front office feel is a necessity, they lock it down. They didn't waste any time after DeGrom left. They locked in Verlander. They didn't waste much time last year on Scherzer. Same goes for Lindor. I think it's a very decisive front office and ownership group. It's not one that takes unnecessary or silly risks, but when there is a target and they're all on board with what he will bring to the table, they go out and they get him. And that I think is the one noticeable thing if I were to choose just one. I mean, there's been a lot, but that's the big one for me.
The Mets are really facing a hard decision, and I know some fans are going to say it's an easy decision, but after signing Justin Verlander, after maybe pursuing a couple starting pitchers like you suggested, Brandon Nimmo is still the elephant in the room. I mean, his market is clearly growing, and he could be looking at $150 million or maybe even more. I mean, it depends how many teams really stay in. Cody Bellinger's off the board, who was a backup plan. Mitch Haniger is off the board, who was a backup plan if you wanted to shift Starling Marte over to center. What do you do with Brandon Nimmo? And if you lose him, what do you do then?
I said it on Hot Stove. It's the trickiest decision the Mets have this offseason. I understand that at some point, enough is enough with payroll. Steve Cohen has been open about it. He's talked about you should be able to win with a $300 million payroll, and that's true. But the Mets are really close to that right now, and they're not there with the roster. And I think when you look at Brandon Nimmo, he's one of these guys where he means so much to this team, and he's turned himself into such an integral player on the field, off the field, what he's been able to do to transform himself into a plus center fielder, the ability to set the table. He brings so much to the table, and the way that the market is, he's a hot commodity for a reason, because if you're not going to play in the Aaron Judge pool, he's it. That's it. And so if the Mets lose Brandon Nimmo, I don't know where you go. I don't know where you go to replace that production. And so on the one hand, again, I totally get you don't want to go too far overboard to retain him. You don't want to pay silly money to retain Brandon Nimmo and term and this and that. But if you choose to draw that line in the sand and to say, here we are, we can't go past it, and you let him go elsewhere, you are going to have a massive hole to fill, and not one that is, it's weird to say this, but as easy to fill as the Jacob deGrom hole. The Jacob deGrom hole, they had a clear ability to pivot right to Justin Verlander. If you lose Brandon Nimmo, that is going to hurt a lot more than losing Jacob deGrom, which again, kind of crazy out loud, but it's true. And if you're a team that the Mets are right now, is clearly, as we've talked about, trying to win a championship this year, right now, I don't know how you don't sign Brandon Nimmo. But so, I mean, listen, I don't want to be the one making that decision. I'm glad that I'm not in the room. It's incredibly tricky. It is the trickiest decision the Mets have to make this year, and I really don't know which way it's going to go.
Neither do we. It's going to be crazy, and this week is far from over. But Gelbs, we know it's a sprint down there. We appreciate the time so much. And please get back in one piece on Sunday for Jets pregame. That is all I ask from you for the rest of this week.
All I have to say, Mike White. Mike White's the dude. Right? You just watch that?
We're getting there. I don't want to get crazy, but I'll tell you what, it's getting more and more impressive by the weeks. And we're buying in. The Jets pregame desk is buying in. I know it's not just me and you either. We are buying in.
I'm all in. All right, man. I'll see you on Sunday.
See you, Gelbs.
See you,
All right, that was obviously Steve Gelbs, who just does an incredible job. Mets, Jets, you name it. He's got it covered. Joe's great, obviously, having him on. We had Andy on our first show. Andy will join us again tomorrow. And to get Gelbs' perspective after a couple of moves have trickled in, and even a move that we'll get to while we were doing this show, Taijuan Walker, formerly with the Mets, signs with the Phillies on a 4-year, $72 million deal. Reminder, this is the Mets Pod Live Winter Meeting Special, baby. Night number 2. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. So, Joe, it feels like it's not going to stop. I'm sure we're going to have so much more news going into tomorrow night as well. Let's start with the Phillies edition of Taijuan Walker, because I think he was somebody that we had come to the conclusion it was a long shot of him returning to the Mets. And when I say long shot, man, I had it at 1% to 2% at best. Taijuan Walker was a great value signing at the time. I think the Mets got everything and more they could have hoped for at that contract. That when you look at that contract compared to the new 4-year, $72 million one, it worked out for the Mets. But the Phillies rotation now with Wheeler, Nola, Ranger Suarez, and Taijuan, along with the addition of Trey Turner, the NL East is the most aggressive division in baseball right now.
4 years and $72 million for Taijuan Walker is a lot of money, which is why it is so important that, when we think big picture, because we're going to talk about, the moves that they need to make right now to get ready for 2023. The Mets need to put so much money into player development, put so much draft capital into pitching. Pitching costs a lot on the free agent market. And, I love what Taijuan Walker brought to the table with the Mets, and fantastic guy. And I'm super happy for him to be able to cash in the way he did. But holy smokes, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a big one. I think when we hear 4 years, $72 million, former Mets starter, we think Chris Bassett. And it just goes to show you that Chris Bassett is probably now going to reach into the territory of maybe beyond 4 years. Maybe Bassett gets 5. And the fact that his contract will exceed $75 million. Bassett's a guy that could be looking into the 80s, could be looking beyond that. So you're right. It's good for Taijuan Walker. As John Heyman pointed out on the timeline, he benefited. He didn't have that qualifying offer draft pick attached to him. The Mets did not extend that to him. So that we know how fast those guys come off the market. It's just a little easier to get those deals done as the Phillies get stronger. But let's get into more of looking ahead for the Mets. I think we ended on the big conversation that I would call the biggest variable in the Mets offseason, and Gelbs painted that picture perfectly. We knew, and we talked about this on our offseason show, if DeGrom left, the Mets were going to pivot to a Verlander, Rodon. They were going to do something at the top of their rotation. If Diaz or Nimmo left, there was no plan B that you and I sitting at home can pull up MLB free agents and go, you get that guy. You get that guy. It was why it was so important to get Diaz done. And to an extent, Nimmo didn't have that same interest as Diaz of let's get this done before things even open up. And we've seen why. His market has exploded. You said it best. He could get $150 million. The term is the most important thing with Nimmo, a guy that's been hurt in his 20s, now in his 30s. Is he going to get a 6-year deal? Joe, I'll shoot it straight with you. What is your line in the sand if you're Billy Epler of the New York Mets with Brandon Nimmo?
For me, I don't know if I could do much better than 125 million,
over
130 million.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, I think that just means he's priced out. And, I know that's going to make a lot of people unhappy. And, maybe the Mets will go a little higher because 2 of the fallback options that we talked about both signed today. Cody Bellinger is a Chicago Cub. Mitch Haniger is a San Francisco Giant. And the question is, what is the pivot? But even more important, when does Brandon Nimmo sign? I mean, there's a lot of people that think Brandon Nimmo is going to hold out into the new year. So are the Mets going to let the whole outfield market in free agency and then potentially trade just pass them by? And at that point, you have to give Brandon Nimmo whatever he wants. If it's 160 million, it's 160 million. You have to suck it up. So the Mets need to either A, get very aggressive with Brandon Nimmo right now and say, look, we want to get a deal done. This is where we'll go, and really, really push to try to close that deal. Or they're going to have to maybe even preemptively pivot away from him just because the market could be gone and they'll be left with nothing. And they have nothing coming from the farm system to supplement in the outfield. It is a very tricky spot that the Mets are in, and I do not envy Billy Epler.
Without then, not just the center field market, which is, it didn't really exist to begin with, and now with Bellinger off and just Nimmo out there until you get into the tiers of, Kiermaier and players like that, the outfield market is not very deep. Mitch Haniger has already been signed. If you're Nimmo, Joe, why would you ever sign before Aaron Judge? Why? Just wait it out. we've heard for a long time, Judge does not want this to be a process that extends into the holidays. Judge could we had code red today. We thought Judge was already done today. If you're Nimmo and you've already talked to the Yankees and teams like that, maybe even the Giants, if Judge went back to the Yankees, if the Giants also call Nimmo, you have to be thinking, I will wait this thing out because teams might get desperate once Aaron Judge comes off the table.
You definitely want to wait until Judge is off the board to solidify that market, because look, the Yankees and Giants are both pushing for Aaron Judge. And, we had the smoke that he was signing with the Giants earlier, and it felt like that was gaining traction, and then it kind of slowed down. So it's down to one of those two teams, and those two teams are both floating massive contracts. I believe I read the rumor is San Francisco is around $360 million. Can't imagine the Yankees are too far behind if they're still in the race. That's a lot of money that becomes magically available if Aaron Judge does not pick your team. So yeah, Brandon Nimmo should certainly wait for Aaron Judge. The question is, how long after? Is he willing to wait and wait and wait? Or is it Aaron Judge signs and then Brandon Nimmo's talks accelerate, and maybe Nimmo's a week or two away instead of a month away?
All right, so we're going to do a live mailbag. This will be fun. As you guys know and listen, we always close out the show answering mailbag questions. We're going to do it live right now. This one from Polar Burger, who asked, any surprise big bats you could see the Mets looking at? Joe, this has kind of been a hot button topic of the offseason. Is there somebody that we're not aware of? We know the Mets need pop. We know they need punch in this lineup. If Nimmo ultimately leaves, and it's felt as the days go on, it actually feels more likely that Nimmo will be somewhere else rather than the Mets next year. They need to find an option somewhere to help this offense next year. So Polar Burger brings up a great point. Joe, is there anyone that you think is a little under the radar that might be an option to give this team some offense?
As far as when he says punch, I'm assuming he means just home run power. And in that case, there's not a ton on the market unless they're ready to pay half of a DH, which you and I have said that's something we're open to doing. I am checking out JD Martinez's back. If his back looks good, I will take a shot on him and have him split time with Daniel Vogelback at DH. And if that costs me a decent amount of money, so be it, especially if Brandon Nimmo walks out the door, like you said. But on the outfield side, keep an eye on the Arizona Diamondbacks. They have a lot of outfielders, and they traded for Royce Lewis from the Seattle Mariners. There's rumors that a couple younger players who maybe not as proven, but young, talented players like Alec Thomas and Jake McCarthy could potentially be available. Both have some center field capabilities, would bring a different dynamic to the team than kind of the Mets currently have. And the cost would be in prospects, not money. But if you're able to fill center field hypothetically with a young player like that, that makes less money. That opens up the door for Steve Gelbs' plan of signing Kodai Senga and Jamison Tyone or something to that effect. Because it's pretty hard to envision. I definitely agreed with a lot of things Steve said there, but it's pretty hard to envision the Mets signing Nimmo, signing Senga, signing Tyone, signing Verlander, signing a bullpen. Like there's a lot to do. So somewhere it's going to have to, I don't want to cut corners is a bad term, but like they're going to have to be creative in where the money's dished out, because it's not going to be spent on every single spot.
This next one from Met Fan Man from YouTube. Any chance the Mets could land Brian Reynolds? Someone that you and I have discussed for a couple of weeks. Then when we were doing our live pod at the Queens Baseball Convention, someone in the audience broke the news to us that he requested a trade. I would never, there is absolutely a chance. And it's a matter of, one, what is the Pirate, and the Pirates can release whatever PR statement they want. I mean, at some point, they're going to at least listen to offers. What prospect pool the Pirates would want in return? This is a player that All-Star in 2021. He's hit 27 and 24 home runs the last two seasons. I mean, the OPS was over 900 in 2021, Joe, as a 26-year-old. He's been playing in a team that, the lineup's been pretty much lifeless for a long time. They're getting some young talent in there. There is absolutely a chance the Mets could pivot to Brian Reynolds, especially if they lose Nimmo. But as we've often talked about, Joe, the cost would be significant.
the cost would definitely be significant. He has multiple years of control. He's an all-star caliber player who can play center field or corner if you want him to.
3 years of control.
Yeah, 3 years of control. There you go. So that's a big ask as to what it'll take. And there's going to be a lot of teams calling and trying to offer things. The Mets certainly would keep Francisco Alvarez out of this conversation. I think that kind of goes without saying. Does Brett Beatty enter the conversation? I would try to have him out of the conversation if I could. And I also don't know how excited about adding Brett Beatty the Pirates would be. I mean, they have Ke'Bryan Hayes under control for the long term. He's one of the people that actually took a long-term deal from the Pirates, and he's slated to be their third baseman, going forward. So is Brett Beatty like a prime target of theirs? I'm not sure. Kevin Parada, first round pick from last year. He's a top 50 or so prospect in baseball right now. He could be of big interest to them. Alex Ramirez is someone that I'm very high on. I have him ranked number 4 in the system on my rankings, which you could check out on SNY.tv. He's a guy that right now is entering the top 100 mix. And this time next year, I could see him being upwards of a top 30, top 25 prospect in the sport. He shows a semblance of all 5 tools. And then, of course, you have to look at some pitching, because these deals typically are going to include pitching, which is a risk for the Mets to take because they're not the strongest in pitching in the system. Blade Tidwell was a second rounder last year. Calvin Ziegler was a second rounder in 2021. And then we can always circle to Matt Allen, who is the ultimate kind of boom bust prospect. He was really highly regarded in the 2019 draft, and he's missed the last 2 years due to Tommy John surgery and then ulnar nerve transposition surgery. He should be good for spring training, but it'd be a huge cost. And I'd imagine it would start with the likes of Parada and Ramirez. And then, who knows, maybe they want some big league pieces too. Like, do they like a Tyler McGill? It'd be a really, really big ask. And, the Mets should make the call and see what it's all about.
All right. This next one is from YouTube, from New Yorker, who didn't ask. It's a demand, Joe. Just get Rodon. Get Rodon.
Oh.
Not to bring down the vibe, the spirit. That won't be happening. The Mets made their big pitching play for Verlander. Rodon's going to get, what do you think, 7 years? 30 million a year?
Yeah.
30 million a year?
6 to 7 in the neighborhood of 30 million a year. Yeah. Carlos Rodon is going to get paid. And, he sounds like he could be a backup plan for the Yankees if they lose out on Aaron Judge. And actually, Andy Martino, I heard say, it could be both. They could hypothetically sign Aaron Judge and Carlos Rodon, which obviously would be exciting for Yankee fans. But yeah, I don't think Carlos Rodon's happening here. Justin Verlander was their big fish, and now they're going to try to supplement the rotation with, we talked about Kodai Senga, we talked about Jameson Taillon, and who knows who's on the trade market. There's names that we probably are, we go back to Chris Bassett last year, right? We didn't have any inclination the Mets were talking to Oakland about him. Just boom, a tweet from Jeff Passan that said the Mets got Chris Bassett. So I wouldn't be shocked if you see one of those kind of tweets come from somebody that's, hey, Mets have traded for blank, and we just had no clue that was happening.
All right, another one here from Thomas Hahn, who always, he always sends us great questions through Twitter. We appreciate him tuning in. He asked, would Trey Mancini be a good option for a right-handed DH, outfield, first base? What do you think of that addition, Joe? We know Mancini was connected to the Mets a ton during the deadline. It didn't happen. It feels like he really, really struggled in Houston once he got there. But he's somebody at 30, 31 years old, still has value in the market.
I actually was talking to a friend about Trey Mancini today that, I kind of forgot he was a free agent. And then today I was just scrolling through trying to figure out some things. And I was like, oh, Trey Mancini. And I went and looked up, and obviously he struggled mightily with the Astros. I think his OPS was like 622 or something with
Nailed
Houston.
It.
So
spot on.
Yeah. So he very much struggled with Houston, but his career is that of a guy that can hit both lefties and righties almost equally. And Buck Showalter is a huge fan of Trey Mancini. I think he was a driving force behind the Mets' interest at the trade deadline. The deal didn't work out. It kind of, is what it is there. But now Trey Mancini's hitting the free agent market at a reasonable age. And based on his second half, does that dilute how much money he's going to get in free agency? Maybe it does. And, I really don't mind that idea, because you and I have been open. We want the second half of this DH to come from outside the organization. We would like to see the Mets find a way to get Francisco Alvarez behind the plate. If that means eating a bunch of James McCann's money and moving him out the door, I want Alvarez behind the plate. That'll, add some power there. And then I want to get an outside player for DH. And I think that would help make the offense a little more complete.
The comments on YouTube keep rolling in. This one from Armand, who said, is Liam Hendriks an option to add to the bullpen? Hendriks under contract with the White Sox right now. He signed that 3-year, $54 million deal. This is the last year of the contract with the team option in 2024. But Joe, it feels like his name's been thrown around, some trade rumors this week with the White Sox. I'll ask you, do you think the Mets would be willing to add that pricey of a guy just to set up Edwin Diaz?
I would hope they'd be willing to consider it if it's deemed more of a salary dump type of trade. If you think of the Raisel Iglesias trade to Atlanta at the deadline, where they basically didn't give up much of anything to the Angels.
Which is
they just
insane,
took on,
by the way.
Yeah. But if the Mets can pull that off with Liam Hendriks, that obviously would be fantastic. He's one of the best relievers in the sport. And that contract that you mentioned, I actually looked into it once I saw, the rumors of him being traded. That option, if you look, the buyout is the same exact amount as the salary. So it's essentially, it might as well be guaranteed. Like you have to pay him all the money to go away, or you pay him all the money to stay. And I think actually if he gets traded, it might get guaranteed. I kind of forget that detail. But if they want to salary dump Liam Hendriks, or to some degree salary dump him, I would hope the Mets would at least be on the phone, because I think that's an opportunity for Steve Cohen and his team to flex their financial muscle, is by taking money that other people want to dump if the player is obviously of quality.
Yeah, Hendriks has been one of the best relievers in baseball for 4 straight seasons now. Truly a model of consistency. It has a K over 9 of over 13 all 4 of those seasons. I mean, there would be few connections in baseball from the 8th to 9th inning, Hendriks to Diaz. I mean,
there'd be none. No, that's
I don't think
it.
unprecedented. Yeah, I don't think there's anything in the league right now like that. So I like the creativity, and I like the fact of, like Joe said, if it comes down to strictly money and not really as much about return for the White Sox, that's a move that you have to consider, because it essentially feels like free agency. And Hendriks somehow out pitches his $11 million price tag that he's on every year. But thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you to Gelbs for jumping on. A reminder, we'll be going live again Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time. It is winter meetings week. It has been crazy. It has lived up to the hype, exceeded the hype. We'll be live on SNY's Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube pages. And Andy, who was with us yesterday, will be back with us for the final show on Wednesday night. And we know Andy is always working on the latest rumors, buzz, notes. So he'll have a lot more updated from when we last had him on, as him and Gelbs are still boots on the ground in San Diego. And one last reminder to subscribe to the Mets Pod, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.